the willingness among Democratic operatives, at least in private, to admit that the party hasn't quite figured it out yet. I think they're a little concerned about how they seem to be lagging behind their own post-election timeline when it comes to at least rallying around what type of party we're going to be.
Welcome to Deep Dive. Here at the Washington Examiner, we dig deep into what's happening behind the scenes in the nation's capital. And this week we have someone who's in the trenches to give us clear insight. Christian Datoc, White House correspondent at the Washington Examiner, has been watching the Democrats struggling to find a party leader and effective messaging to motivate their base. For more, we turn to Christian. Well, hello, Christian. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, no problem, Natasha. Great to be with you.
So your recent reporting highlights some very public infighting within the DNC. And so for viewers who might not be following the day-to-day, can you summarize the key disputes and figures involved?
Well, just at a 30,000-foot level, Natasha, this is a war of ideology, essentially. We've known since Election Day last year, the Democratic Party is at a crossroads, essentially. Do they try and go the Joe Biden route, pursue more moderate policies, and shy away from some of the culture war stuff that the left, the far left, has become entrenched in recent years? Or do they flip that on its head? Do they go extremely progressive and chase someone like an AOC or Bernie Sanders or another progressive as the new North Star of the party? And I think what we're seeing, especially in these summer months, is that fight sort of spilling out into public. Normally, political parties like to have sort of these steering infighting sessions behind closed doors. But like what we saw with David Hogg getting ousted from the DNC after winning his vice chair election last year, because he talked about the need to push sitting lawmakers, primarying longstanding politicians if they aren't pursuing policies that are, progressive enough. I think it's a real issue for the party because they haven't quite settled out what they want to be in the future, and therefore it's being very difficult for them to sort of rally around a new figurehead heading in not only to the midterms, but of course the 28 general in just a few years as well.
And you've spoken to DNC members who downplay these conflicts as bruised egos and HR matters. Do you get the sense that this is a genuine belief or a way to publicly project unity?
I think it's a little bit of both. And here's the problem, right? And I think we saw the Republicans run into this nearly a decade ago with the advent of the Tea Party. But oftentimes, us in Washington get so wrapped up in our little bubbles, we get focused on sort of the palace intrigue of these political fights, and you lose track of the fact that it's pretty obvious a huge subset of the Democratic Party was not happy with the leadership choice and decision that Joe Biden made, and then Kamala Harris, unfortunately for her, inherited when she took over his campaign in July of last year. That being said, I do think part of the problem for Democrats is that those people inside the bubble, they do think that this fight is a little squabbling. It's power fighting and trying to secure a better foothold for these career operatives rather than, sort of a groundswell of movement from the electorate themselves, which is trickling up the power triangle, essentially the pyramid, as it were, and illustrating these fights in real time. So I do think some of the folks in Washington might want to downplay this a little bit, and to their credit, they might actually believe this isn't a big issue. But if you ask Democratic voters, who I'm more focused on speaking with as we head into the midterms, this is a very real fight. And again, I think it's one that's going to have major ramifications, not only for the Democratic Party, but really the two-party system as a whole as we move into this post-Donald Trump era in American politics.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And the departures of Randy Weingarten and Lee Saunders seem significant given their positions in major labor unions. What was the core of their disagreement with Chairman Ken Martin, and what impact could this have on the party's relationship with labor?
It's a tale as old as time in Washington, really, right? Someone runs for a position. In this case, Ken Martin ran to be the next DNC chair and succeed Jamie Harrison after the 24 cycle. But in practicality, they break their promises to the people who put them in that position in the first place. Both of these two union bosses, they were promised by Martin certain, specifics, appearances on committees, and how, they can have more of a share of power internally within the Democratic Party. Obviously, now after Ken Martin has been placed atop that pyramid again, he hasn't made good on those promises. So I'm not surprised, again, to see high ranking at large DNC officials to say, you know what? If the party isn't going to reform itself, then I don't want to have a place in it. Now, these people aren't necessarily reaching across the aisle, so I'm not going to say that it spells doom and gloom for Democrats with labor writ large heading into future elections, but it's just another symptom of this serious ill, this disease that the Democratic Party is trying to fight. Again, I think it's important to have a very strong and vibrant Democratic Party to force Republicans to improve their message. And again, make sure that they are doing everything they can to govern on the promises that they made voters on the campaign trail. It's impossible to have a two-party political system if one of those parties isn't able to, move up a new generation of leadership or at least receive input from the electorate and change how they're steering their share of the country moving forward. It's something that they need to, again, look in the mirror and come up with a solution fast because they are running out of time before 2026. It's going to be here before we know it.
Yeah, it's so true. And David Hogg's initial challenge to incumbent Democrats clearly caused a stir, as you alluded to. Was his departure a genuine attempt to unify the party, or was he pushed out, in your thoughts?
I think it was a genuine attempt, but again, the intentions and hopes of this move just goes to show how disconnected the moderate bubble in DC of Democrats are when it comes to how the party is actually feeling. This isn't exactly what you asked about, but let's look at Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez for a second. She is outraising her Democratic colleagues by leaps and bounds. We're talking millions and millions of dollars ahead of, obviously a House race, but again, a potential general election bid in 2028. If you look at how Democratic voters at the grassroots level are spending their money, it should give you an indication of how the party as a whole is trying to move. I think the forcing out of David Hogg, of Randy Weingarten, some of these other officials who are more on the progressive, end of the spectrum within the Democratic Party goes to show like the voters want one thing, but Washington is still digging their heels in and they are being difficult because it truly does sort of jeopardize, yes, one, their own share of power within the political landscape, but two, all of the money that comes with it. Again, I don't want to bring up the Tea Party more times than I have to, but I was working on Capitol Hill in 2013 after the Tea Party kicked off, heading into those 2014 midterms when folks like Eric Cantor, the sitting Republican leader, lost his primary to a Tea Party upstart candidate. I mean, this is stuff we had never heard of. And I think this is what the Democratic Party is going through right now. It looks messy on the outside, but this is the system, combating a virus that is vital to their survival. We don't know what it's going to look like when they come out the other side, but it's clear that this is a process that's messy, and it's one that I don't think will really resolve itself until we have those results of the 26 midterms next year.
And speaking of, upcoming elections and AOC, what's your take on her potential as a presidential candidate, and what other names are being seriously discussed within the party?
I think she has a very real chance to become the Democratic nominee. I mean, let's be honest. I think the biggest, most fixable flaw in the Joe Biden campaign was age. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, not too long ago, was the youngest ever elected member of Congress. She obviously has the hearts and the minds of the progressives, not to mention the fundraising chops that are going to be necessary to go up against who we assume will be a Republican nominee backed by Donald Trump, whether that's a J.D. Vance or a Marco Rubio or someone else. But she's not really the only player in this game. I mean, you look at someone like Gavin Newsom or a Pete Buttigieg. Again, two guys who have nationwide name recognition, but they've been starting to go in these quote unquote manosphere podcasts, much in the same way that Donald Trump himself did during the 24 campaign, to try and, grease the wheels and perhaps boost them a little bit if not with Republicans outright, at least some of those folks, those independents in the middle, who we do know really are the ones who are swaying elections. It's that Trump Obama coalition in those Rust Belt states. They are the ones who are vitally important for any candidate, regardless of their party, to reach if they want to have a realistic chance. So, in that regard, AOC might not have the biggest leg up on some of her other Democratic counterparts. But I just think the way that the Democratic Party has betrayed its own voters for elections on end now really does portend well to someone like her, who really, even though she's been in DC for nearly 6 years now, is viewed very much as an outsider by the entrenched Democratic political establishment. I'm trying to think if there are any other names out there, maybe someone like Wes Moore from Maryland, again, another young guy in the mold of a Barack Obama. But again, I think we're going to really have to get through the midterms before we can turn a lens on 2028. Even though you and I are right here talking about it right now, I think it's just too murky to try and look into that crystal ball and pull a name out of our hats right now.
Yeah, yeah, I hear that. And Roy Cooper's entrance into the North Carolina Senate race is being seen as a major opportunity for Democrats. What are his strengths as a candidate, and what challenges will he face in such a competitive state?
Well, his strengths are very well known. He's never lost an election. He's coming off an extremely successful tenure as a two-term governor down in North Carolina, where he balanced the budget of all things. A Democratic governor balancing the budget in a purple state. I mean, that's got to bode well for a statewide election. But I do want to sort of pump the brakes here because it now looks like he's going to be running against Michael Whatley, the sitting chairman of the Republican National Committee, who, of course, sort of championed Republicans throughout Trump's winning 24 campaign and did a very good job of raising money in particular when he was the head of the North Carolina Republican Party before moving up to the RNC. There was some question about whether it might be Michael Whatley or Laura Trump, the president's daughter-in-law, who of course herself grew up in North Carolina. But now that it looks like Whatley, I think some of the Republican concerns about whether or not Donald Trump might push Mark Robinson, the former lieutenant governor, who of course was undone by any number of bizarre internet anonymous sex scandals during his short-lived 24 Senate campaign. Those concerns are out the window now that you've got an established, reliable figure like Whatley, who, again, not for nothing, is going to have it tremendous, enormous financial support from Donald Trump's campaign war chest because of the importance that not only North Carolina, but the Senate as a whole and the Republican majority hold for Donald Trump's hopes of governing successfully through legislative means at all during his final 2 years of this second term in office.
And now let's turn to former President Barack Obama's call to action. He recently urged Democrats to toughen up and stop whining. What's the overall sentiment among Democrats you're speaking to? Do they agree with Obama's assessment, or is there a different perspective on how to move forward?
I don't know if they agree with his assessment that they need to stop whining, but there's certainly a concerted effort from Democrats, both running for election in 26 and just, in elected office right now, to try and quote unquote toughen up. You're seeing people post their workout videos, a la RFK Jr. during his presidential campaign. You're seeing politicians go on podcasts, like I mentioned before, but really, really cursing. It's kind of funny to see these small sort of stylistic changes, but it's one that I would say is a real conscious effort. I think perhaps Democrats might be learning some of the wrong lessons from Donald Trump's own ascent to power over the last decade. Let's be honest, cursing in Washington was sort of unheard of, at least on camera, before Donald Trump got into office. And now it seems like you've got politicians on both sides of the aisle dropping BS and MF in interviews on TV or in their campaign ads. This is just the language that they think resonates with young voters. So I'm not so sure that's a conscious response to President Obama's claims that they need to quote unquote toughen up and quit whining, but it's certainly a strategic choice by the top Democratic operatives and at least maybe the marketing and the ad people running the Democratic coffers here in Washington.
And now I want to get a closer look at when it comes to your process as a reporter writing the story. I know there's so many moving parts with that. These DNC conflicts seem to be playing out both publicly and behind closed doors. How do you navigate the challenge of getting reliable information when sources might have their own agendas?
I think it's a little cliched, but my best advice would be you have to trust your sources, but also verify the information they're giving you meticulously. When I say verify, I'm talking about going to people who you know might be in a different camp of thought than this person who came to you originally, going to all of the parties involved. Again, in Washington, or at least in political journalism, a good rule of thumb is to talk to as many people as possible before going forward with a story. It eliminates the game of telephone and gives you a clearer picture than perhaps going with just one or two sources on a topic. So that would be my number one piece of advice. But you're right, it is dangerous, and so that's why you have to develop sources and really make sure to double check the information you're getting before you put it out there on the internet.
Sure. And you mentioned that some DNC members are concerned about leaks to the media. How does that affect your ability to report on these internal dynamics?
I'm not going to say it really necessarily impacts my ability, but it makes it turn up the charm a little bit, right? No, but seriously, while some people, again, are trying to limit the leaks out of the DNC, and I'll say, for the record, the White House and the RNC, everyone's going through this right now. I say we all, every politician talks about, oh, I want to be the most transparent person ever elected to this office. And then they get into office and it's like, I don't know if I want to tell the press everything. That being said, in such a civil war as this, when you've got really two competing, diametrically opposed factions within the DNC, while there is an official party line, there's always going to be someone on the opposite end of that who is more than willing to tell you about how this throws, the progressive wing or the moderate wing under the bus, whatever the story might be. So again, you got to just try and talk to as many people as possible. You got to try and get as clear of the picture as possible. And then we got to write it up in a way which makes the most sense as possible to everyday voters or readers who might not be as in the weeds on these issues as you or I.
Yeah. And what surprised you most while reporting on these stories? Was there anything that changed your initial understanding of the situation?
I think what surprised me the most, to be quite honest, Natasha, is the willingness among Democratic operatives, at least in private, to admit that the party hasn't quite figured it out yet. I think they're a little concerned about how they seem to be lagging behind their own post-election timeline when it comes to at least rallying around what type of party we're going to be, or picking, a few top dogs who we think could be the presidential nominee instead of trying to pit them all against each other right now. So that is surprising to me. Just the fact that Democrats haven't really absorbed all of these lessons from Donald Trump's campaign, which we in the media seem to be able to assess, relatively easily. I guess, again, you know, pursuing something in reality is different than theorizing about it. But that would be the biggest surprise to me, just that Democrats quite aren't there yet. And it's a shock.
Very fascinating. Well, Christian, we thank you for your insight and, of course, look forward to your future reporting at the Washington Examiner.
Take care, Natasha. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for watching Deep Dive. Please visit our website for more of these investigations and feel free to send us your questions or story ideas. We hope to see you back here next week.